Vicon, a great place to download the software itself if you scroll down here, as well as get additional resources around data sheets, selling sheets, things like that. So I definitely recommend doing that. If you haven't downloaded Reflow, you should absolutely do that after the training. If you are running on an engineering demo license, you already have a Reflow license on your local machine or any office demo hardware that you have. So it should be ready to go out of the box with unlimited access for you to use. One other thing that I'll note, when you click on this download link, you can sign up for build information, and we update Reflow quite frequently. We shoot for one release every month. At the most, it's about 45 days, and we're constantly adding features. So I would also say that if Reflow's not doing something that you'd like to see, you've got a question around a feature or a feature request, please get a hold of us, and we'll be happy to work that into our roadmap. Again, we release every month, so a fair amount of those features are user requested. If you enter your email address in here when you download, you will be notified via email when those new releases come out, along with a link to the full feature set. Okay, so let's jump into Niagara here. Here I've got Workbench open. I'm running on 4.6. Reflow works on 4.6 and higher, including 4.10. We strive for same-day support. So when 4.11 comes out, which is in early access now, we will have a Reflow build that works and is bug tested on that release. We will not support versions previous to 4.6, so 4.6 or higher. So I'm just connecting into my station. I want to give everyone an overview of what my station looks like, and so you sort of know where some of this data is coming from when we pull it into Reflow. I'm running locally, so if you look into my driver's network, I just have some folders with classification of device and then the additional folders sort of emulating the device itself with control points under them. Some of these devices have standard PX graphics on them. So here's just an example of a graphic built with the PX editor attached to this air handler here. And then if I look further down in the station, I have some points set up to, they're hooked into ramps and sine waves and randoms. These points are set up to go in and out of alarm. They're also set up with histories, so we've got some live data in my station. And then additionally, things like precision and unit facets are set up on these points as well. I've got a schedules folder with 5 different schedules in it. Nothing major going on there, just some schedule objects. And then I've also got a floor plans folder here with a standard PX floor plan on it. Finally, I'll jump into my station file system. Reflow is going to utilize files from the station file system, so it's going to work with files just as you're used to working with files in Niagara. Everything that you're going to pull into Reflow is going to come from here. And a few things that I grabbed. So Reflow you can brand to your customer, and the whole idea is to give the customer an experience that's ownable and that feels like it was built specifically for them and reflects their brand. So a couple things you'll want to have handy in your station for the client, and one of those things, of course, is a logo. And we're just going to be doing a Vicon branded site for this training, and we're calling it Vicon University. So we're going to sort of emulate a campus setup for Vicon University, and here's an image shot of the campus itself. And these are just some stock photos that we put together. I've also got some pictures of individual buildings here that we'll be using in this directory. I've got some interior shots that we can pull into Reflow. Some of them are a little large. And then finally, I've got some floor plan graphics that we'll be using as well. Okay, and that's about it for my station setup. So to actually install Reflow and get it running, we really have strived to make it a quick and easy experience for system integrators. Really, all you have to do is, of course, install the module both locally in your workbench and then get it on your remote site through the platform software manager. And once you're good to go there, all you really need to do is drag the service from your palette over to the services folder. Now, when I do that and I double click the Reflow service, a few things sort of happen out of the box for you. And I want to highlight those quickly. And we'll go into customization for all of these things here in just a minute. So when I double click the Reflow service, I'm accessing the Reflow view. This is the view that's available to your end customers. So this is the view that you're going to direct building owners, facility maintenance crew, energy managers, those folks that are using the BAS every day. This is sort of their view. We have an additional view called the config view, and this is where you as a system integrator will be customizing and configuring the Reflow experience for those end users. There's a third view called the redirect, and I want to show you what that does in a browser. If you were to open it up in Workbench, it's just going to pull in the Reflow view, and there's not really much of a difference. But what the Reflow redirect view is going to allow you to do is give your customer a full screen experience. So here I've got my station in a web browser. I'm just going to log in, click on services, and go down to the Reflow service that we just added. And I'm going to switch over to the redirect view. Now notice what happened there. It happened really quick and may not have came through very well on the screen share. But if you look previously, when I was just looking at the Reflow view, we still have the Niagara web user interface here. And then of course, if I shrink this down and go into sort of a mobile view, we would get that mobile interface as well when we're in Reflow. And so we don't want to confuse customers, and we give them a nice navigation up here that feels like a modern website. So typically we want them to be in this full screen view. And if you point them to the redirect view, it's going to bring them to this view automatically. So that view exists. So when you're in Workbench and you're editing a nav file, I'll just go into my file system here. You can point this nav file for a specific user to the Reflow service here. And then just make sure that you select, instead of the default view, select the redirect view. This way, when a user logs in to your site, it'll take them right to that full screen view, and they wouldn't even know that they're in a Niagara environment. They'll see that they're in sort of a customized website specific to them. All right, I'll switch back into Workbench. I want to open up the config view first in Workbench. Workbench embeds Chrome for its web browser. In 4.6, it's a relatively older version of Chrome. Workbench is also doing a lot of other things in the background with the Niagara station and the UI going on here that make it that make the experience sometimes a little slower in Workbench than if you were in a web browser. So when you open Reflow in Workbench, you're going to see this warning here. We're going to let you know that you're going to probably have a better experience if you can use a modern web browser. And you can turn that off just by unchecking the warning and hitting continue here. For this training, though, I am going to move to a web browser. Again, we have a little more room to work with. The other important aspect to keep in mind when you're configuring Reflow is that most of your users, if not all of your end users, are going to be accessing the site from a web browser. And it's always better to access and configure in an area that's going to most accurately reflect the end user's setup. So that's why, for that reason alone, I think it's worth configuring in a web browser. So we'll go from here. Just know that everything I'm doing in this web browser, we would be able to do in Workbench, and Workbench is fully supported. So when you first jump into the config, we're going to present you with a wizard that's going to help you get started quickly. This is going to pull in things like the logo, background images, color scheme, and help you get your first building set up without having to dive through each one of those menus over here on the left. So we'll go through that quickly, and then I'll make sure that I go back and hit every area in the config and show you where they exist there as well. When you get started, we want you to have a logo for your customer, a photo, which we call the hero photo, that can be used as the background. This sort of abstract bluish photo back here is the default. Typically, a great hero background could be a building photo. It could be something that your customer uses on their website, something that's branded. Those all work really nice back here as a background. And then finally, we want you to have, where you're going to set up your first building in this wizard, and we want you to have a nice photo of the building itself. So I'll move forward. First, we're going to set up the title. This title appears right here and the subtitle below it. And then it also will appear when the user is in the Reflow redirect view, it'll appear in browser tabs and things like that. So we're going to set this up as Vicon University. And we are going to we'll just leave this called Building Automation System. And then if we click next, we're going to set up our logo and our hero background. So I just click and go to Browse, and Reflow has a built-in station file system browser. You can see that here. This mirrors my station file system, and it's an experience I'm used to using. I'll just click into brand here, and I'll grab the Vicon logo. And then for the background image, I'm going to use that shot of the entire campus, save this hero on my station. Okay, those are looking good. Also note that recommended image size is typically displayed when you're browsing for images. If I hit browse, and I think if I clear this out, you'll see that we'll give you those recommendations right in the file browser. That's also listed in our documentation, and I'll show you how to access that here in a minute. So I'll click next. This part is really important and fundamental to how Reflow works. With Reflow, we take two colors that you pick, a primary and a secondary, and we pull those through the entire experience. This is great to drive consistency across your work, especially when you've got, whether you're working on a site and then you have to come back 6 months later, or you have multiple integrators working on a site separately. You pick colors once and Reflow pulls them through. So you don't have to worry about an integrator, choosing this color and someone else picking the wrong pixel in a color picker, and you have 4 or 5 different blues going across the site. With Reflow, you set a primary and a secondary, and it sort of does the rest for you. So I've got the Vicon brand colors over here in a separate window, and I'm just going to paste those in. We, of course, support color codes down here. And so we've got the blue and the red for Vicon. And I'll point out as we are working through Reflow where those colors are getting pulled in. Okay, we have a built-in weather service in Reflow. This weather service is independent of the station. Reflow in the user's web browser will reach out to our servers at niagaramodules.com and pull down weather information from weather providers. This is built into Reflow. It comes with the license. There are no monthly fees or anything like that that are passed on to you. It's a service that we operate for Reflow. We give you the opportunity to put in a location here. We'll put in St. Paul. And as I type that in, that sort of validates over here on the left and gives you the location that it found. You can also control other things like enabling a widget that'll appear in the navigation, or switching units if you ever need to do that. And then last thing here, we're going to set up our first building. So we'll set up the student union first, so we'll call it that. And we'll say that it has 4 floors. And then finally, we'll browse for a photo. And I'll use that one. Okay, we're all set. As soon as I hit finish and save, all of these changes will be applied to the Reflow theme automatically, and you'll see things change back here. Okay, so our configuration has been saved. You can see that our colors have changed to use the Vicon blue and red here. We've got our hero image coming through in the background there, and we've got our logo up here. We're still not quite done. There's some things we want to fix, but this got us off to a really good start. Before we jump into further customization, I want to show you a couple features of the configuration interface, and then we'll dive into finishing up this hero section at the top. So over here on the left, we've got the configuration pane. This is where all of this menu system is where you're actually going to be setting your values and configuring Reflow. To the right, we've got the preview pane, and this preview pane will update live as you change things over here on the left. I also should note that we're on a release candidate build for this training for 1.4.2 that will be released later this week, either tomorrow or Friday. We're just finalizing our testing there. So I wanted to make sure that I was showing you the latest and greatest for the training. So if you do have Reflow already downloaded, just pay attention to that release email. New version with some cool features coming out this week. Last thing down here, documentation and help. So we've got our documentation built into the tool itself. It's super helpful because you can follow along in our documentation. For instance, if I go to theme and I click theme over here, I can now look up title, subtitle, footer text, get more information on all of that stuff right inside the tool itself. The documentation is also available online, so I can open in a new window directly from the tool, or I can hit this URL right here to access it directly. Of course, if you go to the Vicon site, a documentation link is available right here. And then finally, the last little bit of config UI that's important is what we call the responsive bar up here. When I click on this, I get a couple different options for desktop, tablet, and mobile. And this is going to change my preview to allow me to see my Reflow site on these various screen resolutions. You can see the browser, the preview window sort of changing as I click through each one. And then finally, if I click again, it'll rotate the devices over to a mobile view. Super handy while you're working on content, and something that we stress is very important. Traditionally, our industry has lagged a little behind in mobile support, and it's been a tough thing to do and to build for. Costs a lot of extra labor time. With Reflow, we want to eliminate that, and so we want you to be able to provide really nice branded experiences to your customers, regardless of what screen they're trying to access their automation system on. And we try to do a lot out of the box for you. We'll get more into that in just a minute. Let's fix our hero first. So most of your colors, logo, theming type of stuff is going to be under this theme setting here. You can see I can change the title if I want. As I'm typing over here, it changes on the right. So that will be a true live preview of what you're typing over here will happen over on the right. These are all pretty self-explanatory. I want to hop over to the hero background though and set a couple things. It's sort of hard to read the white navigation items and the white text here on this light background. So one thing I can do, and this is a trick you'll see throughout Reflow when you're using photography, is to set a tint color. And this is going to be a color overlay on top of an image that allows things on top of that to appear a little better. So you can choose any color. You can even choose a solid color if you want. So if you crank the transparency all the way up, you could have a solid background. But typically you're going to grab a white or a black, and you're going to raise that usually around halfway or a little more to let that lighter text pop on top of the image. The other thing you can do, and this is a great trick if you've got a logo with a white background or a black background, you can additionally assign a tint to the navigation bar. And this can be any color. But typically you'll need to potentially put a white background in to sort of hide the box around a logo with a white background, or conversely a black bar to hide a logo with a dark background. That looks pretty good. Maybe just a little transparent. There we go. And then the other thing that we want to do is sort of edit the size of our logo. It's a little hard to read by Tritium under there, so let's increase the size. If I wanted to change that, the same control that I used in the Getting Started wizard is available to me here. I can just browse my station file system and pick another image if I need to. And then for logo size, what we allow you to do is change the height. And this is great because we're going to make sure that all of your images, logos, photos, etc., are properly at the proper aspect ratio. So you'll never, typically you'll be changing just width or height, and we'll make sure that the height or width is adjusted accordingly to what you set. So you'll never have a skewed customer logo in here and get feedback back from them that it doesn't look correct. So I'm just bumping up the height. Reflow's changing the width automatically. I think I'll set it at about 50 here. Looks pretty good. And then separately, because the mobile navigation is a little different, we give you a separate option for height on mobile. And maybe we crank that down just a little bit. While we're talking about mobile here, I think our hero is looking pretty good. And while we're talking about mobile, I want to point out one of the things that Reflow is going to do for you automatically, and that's this mobile menu. So when we're on desktop, our navigation is your standard horizontal menu items here. When I drop down to mobile, that navigation automatically gets put in this mobile flyout under the hamburger menu icon button. And I can click and access or touch and access each one of these links just as I would on the normal navigation. Also, the title of the site is put above this, and the user can dismiss it with an X. One of the many things that Reflow does automatically when you move to a mobile screen. The other thing to notice specifically on this landing page, my dashboard that was previously multi-column is now single column, and those two dashboard cards that were put in for me automatically by Reflow are now in that single column. Okay, I'm going to pause just for a second, take a drink of water here. Any questions around the configuration user interface or that initial theming that we went through? Feel free to unmute and ask away. Okay, great. So we'll move on to some of the other things that are inherently sort of built into Reflow now that we've got things branded here. Reflow is going to connect and pull directly from Niagara a lot of the things that already exist in the station. And it's important to remember that Reflow works on top of Niagara and tries really hard to be a good citizen in the ecosystem. So a lot of the configuration and things that you're going to pull in are directly related to how they're set up in Niagara. And you're not going to need to do anything additional in Reflow. For instance, we don't have our own version of alarms and alarm classes. We work with the Niagara Histories by default and schedules by default. We're just going to pull them in automatically and allow you to make any visual customizations that you need. So we'll start with alarms. This alarm console is here out of the box. It connects directly to the Niagara Alarms database and pulls all of those records in here. Now you can customize the behavior of this by going into the alarms configuration on the left, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. What you have here is a sources table, and when you click into a source, you get each alarm record, and this is paged. And then clicking into or onto a record brings this really nice summary screen up. We think this is a great way to view alarm data. If you or your customer still wants to use the traditional table view, that's also available to you. This is a little more how an alarm would look like if you opened it up in Niagara. And then, of course, we give you access to notes. And again, per what I said earlier, this is the same notes system that exists in Workbench and on the Niagara Web UI. So any note that I would put in here is going to be available to anyone in Workbench or any way they access alarms in Niagara. You can click through alarm records just by moving left and right. And you can acknowledge alarm records as well from here or here. Just to point out to notice how the brand colors are coming through. Now that it's acknowledged, we see that secondary color coming in, the icon and the background of this bar are pulling in that secondary color. The tabs and things like that are branded in the primary color along with the buttons. So all of those little interactions are specifically built with the brand in mind and keeping consistency through the experience. When I'm in this table here, as I hover, the primary color, a lighter version of the primary color is used to indicate hover states. When I click and select, the check marks are also that primary color along with the outline of the tables themselves. And then the other thing to note here is when I click into these dots, we're going to show a badge if an alarm record has notes, and we're also going to show how many notes are attached to that. Last sort of thing to show you in alarms, as far as the end user facing experience, is its view in mobile. So no one wants to have a really long table that they have to page and scroll through left and right, back up to the top to remember what column was which value. And it's usually not a great experience in mobile when you get a table with a lot of alarms. So in Reflow, you can see that our shelf here goes to single column, but we also take the table and convert it into cards. And so now you've got your column labels over here on the left, the values over here on the right. It's really organized, and I don't have to move left and right on my phone and back up to the top to figure out what cell belongs to which column, and then find my place again to find the value. Really nice mobile experience. And these are the types of things that are really difficult to do in a PX file and take, certainly, if you can do them, they're going to take you a lot of time that usually isn't available to you on a job. So Reflow is going to do a lot of that out of the box. And I'll try to continue to point out areas where we have a new or a different mobile experience for users as we get through things. Specifically, as far as configuration on the alarm console, for any page in Reflow, you can just completely disable it. Notice that when I disabled the alarm page, I can still see it because I'm in config mode, but I get this little message that says it won't be visible to users in the Reflow view. I can also see that the menu item, because it linked to the alarms page, was automatically removed for me as well. And when I enable it, it comes back. All pages can have custom titles set. This is great if you want to, maybe this is the global alarm console and we want to make sure a customer knows that. We can change that if we need to. And then we can further customize both the table and the shelf as well. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on the shelf. You can just sort of hide and show priorities. But the priorities are key. So with priority, we give you 3 priorities to choose from. And you can decide whether to set priority based on alarm class, which you see here, and that's the default, or based on priority number. And so with priority number, if you're using the numbering system for priority, I think it's 1 to 255. In Niagara, you can take advantage of that here. You can see my priorities have already shifted on the right, or you can go in and set a specific priority for each alarm class. Just like that. And you'll see when this refreshes, unless we don't have any low or high priority alarms, they might all be medium right now. Yeah, there they go, they switched over. To answer the question, David, yes, you can hide alarms per user. So a couple key thoughts there. So one is Reflow inherits the Niagara security model. So if you have, if you've used the roles and category services to disable anything in Niagara from a specific user, it will not show up in Reflow. Because when that user logs in, they don't have access to it, and Reflow doesn't ever even see that it exists because it will only access the station with the permissions of the current logged in user. The other thing that you can do, we have a user profile system in Reflow. We typically recommend using the Niagara security solutions for everything that you can, and then using our user profiles to really customize content. So maybe you want a different navigation for a specific user, you can assign a profile to that Niagara user and create a special navigation for it. Or maybe you want a certain user to start on a specific page, you can use our profile system for that. To answer the direct question, in 142, we actually added the ability to go in, those user profiles are here in settings, user profiles. We actually added the ability to go into a profile and restrict alarms based on class. So you could uncheck classes per profile that you would set up in Reflow. Great question. You can also go in and completely disable classes from all alarm consoles in Reflow here under the alarm classes option. And then you can control the columns in your tables here in the sources table. I can turn on and off columns, as well as if I click in the alarms table, I can do the same thing. Reflow connects back to the station and pulls for alarm records. If you want to change the frequency, you can do that here. And then, of course, users can filter records by priority. They can look at active alarms only, or they can look at unacknowledged alarms, active unacknowledged alarms as well, if they'd like. They can also control the time range that they're looking at. And this is one area that we really try to do a lot. You'll see it in the top right of a lot of these views. We try to let the user view the data in the way that they want to do it, because that prevents them from coming back to you and asking you to build a custom view for them. So the idea is give them a little more power as to how they view the data, but do it in a way to where it's simple and not confusing. And you'll see that in a couple different areas, and I'll try to point it out as we go through. Any other questions? I'm going to take another drink here. Any other questions on specifically the alarm console? Okay, I'll move on. Schedules are also brought in for you automatically and can be customized with the Schedules tab here. We use BQL to query the entire station and pull in every schedule object that's available. And of course, again, inheriting the Niagara security model, those schedules would not show up in that query if the current logged in user didn't have access to them through the standard Niagara methods. This is sort of the global schedules page. Most everything we're looking at up here at the top, including alarms, is the global version of that. When we get into buildings and creating additional buildings, I'll show you how you can assign schedules, alarms, histories, and equipment to specific buildings. And each building will also have its own alarm schedules, histories, and equipment pages. So really, you can drop Reflow into a single JSON, and this navigation is going to work perfectly on that JSON. Or if you're dropping it onto a web supervisor with many buildings, you can customize these to either be hidden if you don't want to show a global view, or you can change their names to say global alarm console or something like that. Each schedule is going to appear as a card with its next event in gray there. Schedules are searchable, so again, sort of power to the user. They can search for anything and pull that up. The list will sort of auto-filter. When a user clicks on a schedule, we pull up the native Niagara view. The Niagara schedule editor is an area that works really well on the web and works really well on mobile. That was an area that we didn't feel like we needed to improve right away, so we pull it in here. User can change the schedule, save it, and close it. You can disable specific schedules if you don't want them to appear in the global list. You can do that. And again, as I mentioned, you'll be able to assign schedules to buildings as well. Schedules is pretty cut and dry. Last built-in thing I want to show you are histories. So histories in Reflow. Again, Reflow is going to pull all of this in for you automatically. As soon as you drop in the service, Reflow accesses the station history database and pulls in each one of these histories. It pulls them in as cards, and as I hover over cards, it gives me a preview of the data. It also tells me last value and when that last value was recorded. When you assign histories to buildings, it will the building name will be available too, or you can turn that off in the configuration. Clicking on a history takes me to the chart viewer. And this chart viewer is relatively fully featured. All the things you would expect as far as interaction with a chart. I can drag and I can zoom in here. You can see that, notice the colors here. My secondary color is being used as the draggable area, and the primary color is being used as the first line color. I can export this image as an SVG or a PNG. I can also export a CSV file of the data. As the user can select the time range here as well, so they can look at the data for different times, and the user can also check and change the type of chart that they're going to display. We also have a table view available. If I want to add data for comparison, I can click Add Chart Data here. And since we've got a random here, I'll just pick the ramp to show next to it. Histories are searchable as well, so if I wanted to look at all of my ramps, I could do that. And then there's this little filter button here to the right, where if I've got history groups enabled, I'll be able to filter by group. I can also filter by type, and I can sort based on the type, when it was last updated, or its name. And I can control that order as well. Once I've got my history selected, I just hit View Chart. And now that additional history came in. Notice that the secondary color is being used for that chart. And if I add a third line, we haven't defined any additional colors yet. But what's really cool is Reflow. Let me grab the sine wave. Reflow is going to look at the primary color, which is this blue, and it's going to use some math to determine complementary colors. So we know that this sort of purplish color here is going to work really nice next to the blue, and we generate that color for you automatically. And we'll do that for up to 15 lines. I think it's 14 lines. We'll do 7 for the primary color and 7 for the secondary color. So you can feel good that knowing that your colors when people are viewing data are going to look really nice together. Additionally, over here in the configuration, you can set some defaults. So you can set the default time range on charts. You can set the default chart type, as well as the default chart color. Color pickers in Reflow will allow you to choose and link to a primary or secondary color, or you can do a custom color and pick anything. What's really cool is if you leave it linked to a primary or secondary, when that gets changed in the global colors configuration, you'll be able to take advantage of that here automatically. And then the last thing to note about histories is we have this concept called featured histories. Featured histories will appear at the top of the page and provide quick access to users to get to historical data that might be really important. There's also a widget on the landing page that we'll explore here next that you can pull in featured histories and show them on that landing page. So we'll create one to get started. I just click the add button, and you can see that now that we're adding a featured history, this new pane appeared to the for the end user view. It's called featured up here at the top, and those featured histories will load in cards here. So we'll just call this maybe energy usage. Sorry, I'm not super creative with my names here. And then we'll just pull in two values here. We'll pull in our random and our sine wave. This configuration history picker is very similar to the one that we walked through to the end user. It's a little more compact, but it is going to show you last value and status, when it was last updated, its type, and if you hover, you can see the full record type in there, as well as exactly which device it's from. You can search this, and of course you can filter it as well. So now that I've selected these two histories, I'll hit OK. And you can see that pulled in really nicely here as a card. And then when I click on this card, it's also going to set the chart title for me here as well. Okay, I'll pause there for just a second. Any questions on histories or schedules? Okay, we'll move on. Let's take a look at the navigation and the landing page. So one thing I realized as I was clicking through here, I did not set my navigation color, so I want to show you where that is as well. Oops. If we go into theme and we go to colors, here's where I set my primary and secondary colors. And then additionally, I can change those hero colors that we edited in the hero section. But I can also set my navigation colors here as well. So I think we should hover navigation items in red. And so I'm just going to copy that red color and paste that in. And we will have active items in blue. And so I'll paste that blue color in. So now when I hover, I've got that red. When I click and we're actively on the alarms page, it turns blue. Navigation in Reflow is fully customizable. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on it. I would suggest exploring it when you download the software. We support drop-down menus. We have a special drop-down menu called the building menu, which will actively update as you add new buildings to Reflow. We also have support for labels, and labels can be used. I'll just add a label in here. So I clicked add an item, and I'll choose the item type as a label. Here's our drop-down menu. Here's the building drop-down menu, home and logout links as well. If I choose a label, though, I can choose to just anything. I can put in custom text, or I can choose the current logged in user, the current date and time, and I have lots of different formats that I can choose from here, as well as custom formats. Or I can show which building they're actively selected, which comes into play when you're building more of a campus-based site. I'll delete that for now, and I will add a logout link. So again, I'll click Add Navigation Item. We'll pick a logout link. Reflow is going to put the title in for me automatically, and we'll set that there. So now my users can log out. We have this concept called the Overflow Limit. You may notice as you start adding items, when you're on and again, depending on the width of this logo, these items may start running into the logo, or there may not be enough room to get everything you want on the page. And this, for this, what we don't want is we don't want these items to wrap to a second line. So here, I'll just show you quickly. If I start typing in a long name for the alarms menu, you can see it starts to wrap, and this doesn't look very good. Certainly I should use a shorter name, but the other thing that you can do to sort of prevent this from happening is using the overflow limit. And what happens is when your menu items get above this limit, even on desktop, we will put them behind the mobile menu. So as I start dropping this down, you can see each one of those items disappearing, and all items then exist under this menu. The other thing you can do is set this to 0, and now you just have that hamburger menu for both the desktop and the mobile experience. This is also explained in this little tooltip. In the config, you'll see these little tooltips everywhere. Just hover over and they'll give you a little more information. And of course, consult the documentation where it'll expand on that even further. As far as, and I'm going to set this back here. The other important thing to know is that in these lists, you'll see them throughout Reflow, whether it's in dashboards and buildings, equipment. These little handles here are grips. They indicate that this item can be moved. So if I want to reorder alarms to the bottom of the list, I just click and I drag. And you can see that as I'm doing that over here on the right, my items are changing in order. This overflow limit's always going to start at the right and start removing items at the right here or at the bottom of this list. So items at the top of the list will be removed last if you start to hit that limit. The other thing that's available in Nav is the weather widget. So this is pulling from that location that we set up earlier in our setup wizard, and it will show current conditions, an icon for the current conditions, as well as the current outdoor air temperature. Okay, so that's Nav. Any questions on that or anything else before we jump into the landing page? I should note it's possible, what we looked at is the global navigation, and this would be set for all users unless you've overridden it in their user profile. So if I go into user profiles, and I'll just go into the default one now, I can add as many as I'd like. I'll go into the default one. Here, I have a separate navigation where I can turn off the global navigation, and I can copy it as a template if I want, and I can add my own special navigation for this profile. So it's possible to change that around. And you assign profiles to Niagara users. So you can have, a profile encompass a whole group of users and only have to maintain the one profile. Okay, we'll jump into the landing page here. The landing page by default is where users are going to start when they access Reflow. Again, through user profiles, you can change that start page here. And so again, by default, it's going to be at the landing page, but I can pick any page in Reflow, including a history chart or the alarms console to start users on. If I go into the landing page configuration, there's a few widgets that you can enable, and then we also have our dashboard here. So I want to take you through the widgets, and then we'll look at dashboards. So we have a buildings widget, and this widget will appear above the dashboard. Typically, we recommend using this when you've got 4 or more buildings and you want a user to select a building before they do anything else. We're going to pull in all the buildings automatically. We're going to pull in their photo, add a really nice tint so that the white text of the building name shows up, and then of course clicking is going to take us right to that building. The reason why we only recommend using this if you have 4+ buildings is because you can use the dashboard system to build very similar cards, and that's typically a much better experience if there's only 3 or 2 buildings. It's where you could have 2 cards, 1 for each building, along intermixed with other important data that you would want to bubble up on the landing page. The other 2 widgets, and we haven't added equipment yet, so I'll enable this, but there is no featured equipment yet. You can choose specific devices that will show on the landing page. if you want to sort of bubble them up to the top. And that's the featured equipment widget. We'll come back to that once we add some equipment. And then the featured histories widget. Now we did add a featured history, and you can see it added that chart here. If I had more than one featured history, they would appear as tabs across the top, and users could switch to them. I'll disable that for now. Okay, the main star here, though, on the landing page is the dashboarding system. And I should note that not only are these dashboards available on your landing page, but each building page has its own dashboard that you can create. And then in Reflow, we have this concept of custom pages under the Pages menu here, where you can create as many pages as you want, and those pages can have dashboard content on them as well. So we'll get into a few dashboard cards here. Feel free, if you see one as I'm going through here and you want to see it, just shout it out in the chat. I'm happy to show it to you. Reflows comes with 2 alarm cards enabled, because those are 2 that we can pull data for automatically. We know what your active alarms are based on the alarms database, and we pull in weather data from the location that was specified as well. When I go into a card, I get its configuration. Every card is going to have a type, and this is what determines the content of the card and will control all of these things, all these properties that I can set below. And we'll go through a couple of different types. All cards will also have a width and a height that you can specify. They will default to being single width, which is single column, and auto height, which is typically a single row. For this particular card, I can give it a title. You can see as I type in here again, it changes on the right. And for the alarm card in particular, I can decide to show active alarms or the total record count. I can also choose whether I'm filtering by building, or if I only want to show a specific class or priority, I'm able to do that as well. And when I choose something like alarm class, I just pick the class or classes, and those pull in. Most cards are going to have a hyperlink along with most of my navigation items. So this Hyperlink Picker is standard throughout Reflow. You'll see it everywhere where you can link to something. Reflow there's a couple different things you can hyperlink. So the first one is a Reflow link. These are pages inside of Reflow. So whether it's the landing page, a custom page that I would have created, a link to the building, a link to specific items inside of the building, links to equipment, histories. There's a chart builder built in here. So I can pick a history and give it a chart title and link to it. All available through this option. The other type of link is a Niagara org. So I can link to anything inside of Niagara in Reflow, and it'll sort of be embedded into the experience. When you link from a dashboard card or a navigation item, we're going to pull up a full screen view in a modal window. So if for some reason I wanted to, let's say, link to the property sheet of my numeric ramp point, I just pick it. There's my property sheet auto selected. The default view will be selected, but I can pick any view attached to that point. If I go to, I showed you earlier in my station, I've got a floor plan attached to this folder. That PX file is right here because it's the default view. And I could do that. So I'll just click OK to this and show you what that looks like. Now, if I click on the active alarms, we've pulled up that PX file full screen. You can embed PX files in custom pages and a few other spots in Reflow that we'll get into. So you have lots of options as far as how you can pull in that data into Reflow. The last thing that I can link to is anywhere on the web. So this is great if maybe you're showing some energy data in a card and you want a utilities providing a dashboard through their website that you would want to link to when a user clicks. You just type in HTTP or HTTPS and you can link directly to any URL. That's going to load, as long as you keep this checked, that's going to load in a new window for the user. We'll cancel out here and whoops, let me edit this. Forgot that I had saved it. We'll bring this back to the Reflow Alarms console. For the alarms card and many other cards, you can pick icons. We've got a set of 1,800 icons from the Font Awesome icon pack available for you. And those 1,800 plus icons appear in 3 different weights. So really there's almost 6,000 different options to choose from here. We try to make it really easy on you by providing a recommended category here on the left. These are items that icons that we've handpicked that will work great for building automation. Things like dollar signs for energy savings, thermometers, seedlings and things like that, different pictures of buildings, super helpful. I'm going to uncheck. There's lots of other categories you can look at here on the left, and then of course you can search. So let's look for different types of bells that we may want to use instead of the standard one. We'll use this one here. I hit OK, and it's available. Maybe I want to color this red, draw a little more attention to it. So that's the alarm display card. The forecast card automatically pulls in data based on the weather location, but if you need to customize that, you can turn off the option that uses the global config here, and you can type in any city and state, choose any latitude and longitude, or enter any zip code. You can also customize the icon set for the particular card. And we have a couple different icon sets for weather, including the Font Awesome icons that you would have access to in the icon browser. All right, I'll add a few more cards. And again, feel free to shout them out in the chat if you want to see one in particular. One that I like to show is the Niagara point card. This is how you can pull in a single point and give it some prominence in a dashboard. I chose that, and then I'm going to pick this point here. I'll just grab that numeric ramp. Remember, this was the one that had unit facets and precision facets assigned to it, and those pull into Reflow as well. I'll give it a title. We'll just call it Space Temp. Let's call it Lobby Space Temp. And then for the title, we can choose different options there as far as how it displays. Of course, we can set things like colors. If we need to, we can pick an icon, which I'm going to grab a thermometer. And then, of course, we can set a hyperlink. What's really cool with these point cards, though, and what really can set you apart as far as the way your dashboards look for your customers, is adding an image. So if I just grab, let's say, again, imagining this is a card for the space temperature of a lobby, and it doesn't move from 100 to 20 degrees in the course of 10 minutes. If I just grab an interior shot that I've got here, I'll just grab this lobby. I can pull that photo in as the background, and then if I use that same trick that we used up here on our hero background with a tint, but I make it white, I can sort of fade it out a little bit. And what's really cool is it gives the user context, because they see that lobby every day. They know that this value is directly related to their lobby. And I could even just get rid of the word lobby there and just call it space temp. And the user inherently, because of the context of the photo, knows where that value is coming from and instantly glances at it and can make that connection. These types of, they seem very minor, but they really go a long way into making the system feel owned by the user and the organization, and B, quickly identifying points and navigating around the system. So we encourage you to do things like this as much as you can, and we try to make it really easy for you. I'll add another card here. In addition to our weather forecast or just the current conditions card, we also have weather maps support inside of Reflow. This will show precipitation or precipitation and cloud coverage over a specific area. This again is a service that comes with Reflow. This is provided in the Jace Pro license as well as the supervisor licenses. You can choose between a dark and a light map. And we default to where we're located, just north of Columbus, Ohio, but you can click here and specifically set a latitude and longitude, or you can search for a place. And this is actually a new feature in that it looks like we need to take a look at. Typically, it should have flew me out there. So another thing to add to the 1.4.2 release. I'll just zoom out here and get into St. Paul. There we go. And now we see the weather map update. And I'll zoom out a little bit so we can hopefully see some precipitation somewhere. And then you can control, like for instance, in this map, we don't want to see all those county lines. We can turn those off and maybe turn off some of the roads. So really easy to configure and get going. Another pretty powerful card we have is the table card. I'll pull that in here. I'm going to make this one double width. Tables allow you to specify rows and columns, columns and rows for data in those columns. So you get started by adding some columns. We'll just call this room. And then we'll add another column called temp. And we'll set this to be a Niagara point. These are the default cell types, so this will just be static text that I type in. This will be a link to a Niagara point. And you can see that as I hover, you can see over in the card that the thing that I'm editing is highlighting. And now that I've added now that I've added columns, I can go in and add rows. So we'll just call this one lobby. Put lobby as the value, and then we'll pick that same point that we have in our other card, and that'll pull in. We also have these things called elements on tables. So if I wanted to add an icon for the point status, I just click status icon, and it's going to color and change the icon based on whether there's unacknowledged alarms, acknowledged alarms, things like that. I can choose the position if I want before the value. Here we've got an active alarm now because the icon changed. And I can also link in other points and things like that. So if I had occupancy status, I could display that in a badge. Maybe we want to do that next to the room. I don't have a point set up for that, but you sort of get the idea here. Just by typing that in. So really easy to build, and I'll just duplicate this a couple times so you can sort of see how the table card flows. Now, what's cool is this table card's because it's set to height auto, it's gonna grow, and the card's gonna be as tall as the amount of data. The other thing that you can do is lock it to, let's say, a single row's height, and then it will scroll. When I've got wider columns and I look at them on mobile, they're going to drop to a single column. So you can see our table here has dropped. And then we're also applying that same principle that we do in our alarms to turning those rows into cards. You can turn that off specifically for tables right there in the config. Okay, two more cards that I really want to make sure that you see. So I'm going to drop this table back to a single width. For custom content, you can pull in any content that you can imagine into our dashboards. We enable that through two cards. The first one I'll show you is called the HX View card. When I select that card, I'm asked to pick a view. And this is what's going to allow me to embed content that I've created as a PX file or that's been created for me in the form of a different Niagara module or view. I just pick the component in my tree. I pick which view I want, just like I did in the link picker, and hit OK. And now that PX file is embedded into my dashboard. And that's probably not quite enough room, so I'm going to set it to double width and height. And I'm going to move this up to the top. One thing to note here too, because this is a double width dashboard card and double height, these next two cards can squeeze in over here to the right of it. Reflow is going to do this for you. So it's going to try to condense all of your dashboard stuff up to the top and to the left. So if there's room for additional cards, we'll put them in there. And of course, again, you saw me earlier, I can reorder these cards as much as I want. So that's how you can pull in a PX file into our dashboards. The other option, and I'll just edit this one, you can use what's called a URL card. URL cards allow you to pull in content either from the internet or HTML content that exists on your station. So I'll pull in niagaramodules.com first. You'll see how our website will load. Not every website will allow itself to be embedded in an iframe, and that's sort of how this works. In some cases, you might have some issues for that. Sure, our website's still up here. Try disabling and re-enabling. I have to check into that one there. Try this again here. I'll have to check into why our website's not pulling in there, but there's Microsoft Bing, and I'll just pull that into double width and height and pull it up to the top. So there's sort of an example of pulling things in across the internet. The other thing you can do, and I'll show you my workbench here. If you look at my station file system here, I've got this HTML file, and you can hit that by going to the /file URL. So if I type in /file/custom.html, this is now going to load a local file from my computer, or sorry, from my station file system into Reflow. And it looks like I need to go in and correct my image on this file. But you can see I created a table in HTML, and I can pull that in directly. So lots of options for customization. Any questions on dashboards, custom content, any of that stuff before we move on? Okay. So I mentioned there's a couple other places where you can have dashboards. If we go into buildings and I click the student union building that we created, you can see that on this building page I have a dashboard here, and I can add as many dashboard cards as I want to that. And I'll just add a history card since you haven't seen that one yet. Great question on double wide cards on mobile. If I switch this one over to double width, what we're going to do is we're going to make it take as much room as possible. But of course on mobile we've only got a single column, so you see that drops to single column here, specifically in mobile. Good question. Height will work though. So if you specify double height, the height will take up to effectively two rows in the single column on mobile. And you can see, like, as I go to tablet, this works, double comes back and works. Okay, I want to dive into the build. Well, let's jump into equipment and how that works in Reflow. So there are some new concepts here. I showed you earlier in my station that I've got a whole bunch of devices sort of emulated, and we'll be pulling those devices into Reflow. So typically you're going to commission the site, pull in all of your points and get your devices set up in Niagara first, and then you're going to move on to Reflow and pull in those devices to build graphics inside of Reflow. Reflow has this concept of equipment types. Equipment types are there to help you organize devices and give an organized presentation to users as far as sorting and categorizing devices. They also allow you to specify a template of points to show on a graphic. So you can think of equipment types as a way to organize, and B, a way to have templates for your points. These equipment types that are in this list come by default in Reflow. So every Reflow site that you start will have all of these types. You can edit these, you can remove them, you can delete them, you can change their points templates, but this is how they're going to load out of the box. I should also note, and this might be a good time to demo before we dive too deep into equipment, if you make changes to equipment types or points templates, you won't have to do that every time. You really should only ever have to do it once. Reflow has this really nice tool called Configuration Backup. So once you make those changes, you can come into this tool under Settings, Configuration Backup, create a new backup. That's going to create a backup file of your configuration. And we'll just say Icon U. And you can download that backup file and apply that to the next station that you create with Reflow. So we recommend going into equipment first thing, making the changes that you need to make to your equipment types, including setting up your points template, exporting a backup, and starting every job from that point. Your station backups are going to appear here in the Reflow directory. The config.json file is your master configuration. That's the active config. And then any backups will be in the backup folder. You can see that here. To show you how backup restoration works, if I go into my backup and I just hit reset to the default configuration, all the configuration that we've done throughout the last hour will be lost here. The wizard will come back and we're back to the default branding. If I go into my backup and restore, everything will come back, including all those dashboard cards that we built, the names of buildings, all of that stuff comes right back. So a great way to come up with some templates and themes to get started with jobs quickly. Okay, so back to equipment. Here's where I would add an equipment type. And when I'm editing or I want to add devices for a specific equipment type, I'll start on AHUs. I can go do that here. So here we're looking at the equipment type, and then the equipment type will have a list of devices under it. The equipment type also has points, and I'm going to click into that first. So this is the points template for AHU. Again, this is generated by Reflow out of the box for you. And this is the template that'll be used when you identify more air handlers from Niagara. We're going to take the points under those air handlers and put them in these groups in this order. Of course, you can change the order by dragging. You can delete and remove points from here. You can click and rename groups. Now, if you notice over, and you can of course also rename the points, we're going to detect a point on this air handler that you would be importing and give it a nice readable name. The way we detect that point is specified over here under an equipment type, is specified over here on the right. And all of our equipment types out of the box use what's called a regular expression. If you've never heard of that before, that's fine. If you know how to edit and write regular expressions, I'm sorry for your pain that you had to learn that, but you can do that right here if you like. If you're feeling crazy, you can edit these regular expressions. We also, down here, will give you a little tester. So like, will this regular expression match this value? It will. It won't match it without the M or the D though. So you can test points against our regular expressions there as well. But don't worry, if you want to create your own identifiers, you don't have to learn regular expressions. You can also match points just based off their name. So if I take this one out and I just regular expressions start with a slash and end with the slash here. If I just get rid of those slashes and I just say match CLG, VLV, CMV. Now it's only going to match a point named that exactly, and it's going to call it cooling valve command. The other option that we have for identifying points under equipment is sort of a combo of the two. We call it Niagara Expressions. So let's say I've got, I'll put this one back to cooling valve command, and let's say for some reason in here I've got a new point named zone number temperature, and I want to match a bunch of points, but they all have a number in them. So like Z3T and Z4T. All of those could be matched with this hash character to represent a number. And then if you want to display the number in the point's name, you can use this $1 here. And now if I open up my auto detection details, you can see we've got some examples put in here for you already. Z4T would auto detect, and it would be displayed as zone 4 temperature. And you know, Z003T would also match and be displayed in this manner. So those are the three options you have for point detection and identification when you're importing devices into Reflow. Reflow is going to do a lot with these points, and that's why we have you import them in sort of separately. I'm going to delete this point. Now, the other cool thing, and really an important thing, is you certainly are not going to want to go into every single one of these equipment types and edit each one of these individually. We make it even easier for you because we allow you to import a CSV file. So most organizations are going to have a standard points list. You can take that and use it as a base to pull those into Reflow. And I want to show you what that looks like. Let me open up my... So in my station file system, I've got the CSV file, this point name CSV file, and I've just opened it here in Excel. All it requires is the display name and the Niagara point name, or this could be a regular expression or a Niagara expression. And I can also specify what group I want it to go into. So with a single Excel file, I can get all of my equipment types set up in Reflow really quickly. This is also great if you're retrofitting a job and it may not follow your standard point naming conventions. You can do a quick BQL query to get all of the control points and then export that as a CSV, and you already have all of your Niagara point names. You just need to sort of match them up with how you want them displayed. So this can make it really fast. When I go into Reflow, again, if I go to Actions, Import Template from CSV File, I pick that CSV file that I've opened in Excel. I hit Next. It found 236 points. I hit Next, and it's mapped them. You can see our airside group came in, outdoor air temperature mapped to OAT, again, just like it showed in this Excel file here. If you don't have a point naming convention Excel sheet and you want to edit our existing ones, you can export them right here. So I can just download a CSV file of the air handler as it exists here, and I can open that CSV file, edit it, re-import it, and I'm good to go. Okay. Does that make sense? Any questions around point templates before we start importing some devices? Things will become more clear, I think, as we import devices. Okay, let's pull some in then. So again, I'm on my air handlers. I'm going to click Add New Air Handlers. I'm going to find those devices in my station tree, grab air handler 1 and 2, I'll hit Next. And now Reflow is going to ask me a couple questions on how I want the graphics for these two devices to display. We have two different options for you when you're showing graphics for equipment. One is called the Reflow display style. The other is called the Niagara HX display style. In the Niagara HX display style, if that was correct or selected, a PX view or any view from Niagara would be embedded inside of Reflow, and you can see that here in the picture. If I choose and that's it. That's all that will display there. If I choose this picture though, the Reflow display style, you can see that Reflow is going to add point cards for me. Those are going to work great in mobile, and we'll take a look at how that works. And I still have the option to include a static image or even an animated Niagara PX file there if I'd like. So we'll start with Reflow and we'll move on to the other options. Once I pick that I'm using Reflow, I have additional options for the graphic that I'm going to display, and that's what I talked about a second ago. So I can just show a static image, and we've got a little library of static images for you to use if you want to use them as thumbnails or placeholders in your sites. You can pull them from this equipment library here that we've got. And we'll start there. The other option is you can choose to use the components default Niagara view. So remember on that air handler, I have a PX file attached to it. This would pull that in automatically. Or I can say, no, use this specific OR that I'm picking as the view. And again, there's that graphic on that air handler. Again, I'm going to go with image to start, and I'll show you every option. Okay. Now that we've got our graphics situated, we're going to import the devices into Reflow. We're going to automatically fill in the display name exactly as the device name. It's going to allow me to pick a building and a floor that it's associated with, and we'll just put these two on the first floor. I can override the room name. I can also, in my graphics settings, specify a room name slot to use, and we'll check the slot of the device. If it exists, we'll pull that in for room name. I can choose served by. We won't have these air handlers served by anything, but when I add some VAVs, we'll have them served by our air handlers. I can pick a status point, and there's a default one defined on each type. Status is going to, if that point is overridden or an alarm or false, that status will be pulled through for this entire device. So this allows you to pick a point on the list that will be used for global status of the device. Typically, it would be like a COM status point or something like that. Can also pick a schedule that can be attached to the device. And then down here, this should look familiar. Here is our points template, but now our points have been mapped in. And you can see how this works now, where now instead of saying how we're going to map the point to cooling valve command, we're saying here's the point that we found that we're going to use for cooling valve command, and this is directly based off of that template that you updated earlier. And you can change this to any point on the device. This is searchable, so you can quickly and easily find things. You can also completely clear it out, in which case now this point won't display on the graphic. So this would happen if you cleared them out or if Reflow didn't detect a point based on your criteria. But we have this one, so oops, let's add that one. From here, I can also change the group names, and let's call this one set points instead of critical. And now this is independent from the template, and this will be applied to this device. Now, when I click next to go to my second air handler, notice I could, if I wanted, I could have clicked finish, and these same settings would be applied to every device that's left to do. But when I click next, all of those changes that I made, so the floor that I assigned, the schedule that I picked, renaming critical to set points, if I changed any point assignments and those points also existed on this device, all those would be pulled through. So you should, as long as you're importing like devices all at once, you should really only have to go through this one time, and you should be able to click next a whole bunch or hit finish. The only thing you may want to change is, the floor or a schedule, something like that. So it should be a relatively quick process. So I'm going to click finish, and now my two air handlers have been brought in. Notice the name here, the building it belongs to here on the right, and I can of course reorder these over here. You'll see them move on the list. Okay, before we go deeper into equipment, I'm going to quickly import some VAVs, and I'm just going to go really fast. I'm going to do the same settings that I did earlier. I'm going to pick all 6 of my VAVs. I'm going to click next, I'll use a reflow display style. I'm just going to grab a static image for now of a VAV and pull that in. Click next. I'm going to assign the first 3 to the first floor. We will say that these 3 are served by air handler 1. I'll leave all the points as they are. And then for these next 4, I'm going to say that they're on the 2nd floor and served by air handler 2. Okay, those VAVs came in. This is what the global equipment screen looks like. We only have a single building added right now, but as I added multiple buildings, the building name would appear next to the floor that it's under. And you can see that we're showing a single point for each device. And that single point is what's called the featured point. And if I go to the points template, I can edit the featured points by clicking on the stars next to these things. So if I say, okay, for air handlers, I want cooling valve command to be the featured point. Any new air handlers I import will have that set as their featured point. By default for air handlers, we have discharge air temp. And then I can, of course, go into each device and set its featured point individually if I need to. So again, if I want cooling valve command for AHU1, I can just turn that on. And now when I jump back out, you can see on this card where we can only show one value, cooling valve command's shown first, as well as here. So this is the overall view. This is the same view that if I were to go into a building and go to equipment, there's the overall view just for this building. And again, all these devices belong to this building, so not much of a difference between the two. But as I would add buildings and assign equipment, there would be. So back to the overall view though, I can view by type in which they're categorized by equipment type. The user, again, power to the user, can also switch and group by floor. And so here we're seeing a mix of different equipment types associated with the first floor, with buildings as headers. When I group by type and I click on a type or I click view all, I get what's called the summary view. This is going to list all of those pieces of equipment. It defaults to grid, and it's going to show, again, just some data with a single point. I can also switch, the user can switch to a table view, but before I show you that, the user can also switch which point is visible. So here's the featured point where they're different. Here's cooling enable. So this, hopefully, along with what I'm about to show you next, prevents you from having to build a table full of 50 devices with 3 columns of points that a stakeholder wants to see, getting a call when someone else gets a chance to look at it, add 2 more columns, and rework after rework for a specific view. This is going to put some power into the user's hands and allow them to view their data the way they need to. That can be amplified even more so in the table view, where now we're able to look at multiple points at once. And if the user goes into table options, they can edit the columns themselves. Here's what's available. Here's a bunch that I'm adding. And I can look at everything there. You can set the defaults for summary views by clicking on the summary views option under the equipment type. You can set the default view, so when someone comes in and hits view all, it's going to default to grid, and of course it remembers that I was already viewing it in this table, but you can set the default view here. You can also set the global defaults in the graphics settings under equipment. But let's move this to table. And when we go into the table view, again, you can choose to use the global defaults for these options, or you can say, I want to see, 7 columns. Or you can say, I want to see these specific columns by default. The other thing you can do is add additional table views. So if I add a summary view here, I can give it a name. Maybe this is the energy report. And I'm just going to pick some additional columns here to add to it. That comes in as a custom view called Energy Report. This new icon appears, and I can access it there. So users will always have access to a custom table and a customizable table and grid view. And you can create additional views and link to them using that feature. Any questions on that navigation, that flow, custom views, and summary views before we dive into the actual device graphics themselves? I'm going to pause here and grab a drink. Okay, let's move on to device graphics. So of course, clicking on a device here in this list, or when I'm in the grid or table view, is going to take me to the graphic for the device. And remember, we added this as a reflow style view here. So we're seeing graphic representation of the device itself on the left, and all of those points that I mapped in over here, both on the right and below the device graphic. Also notice as I scroll, the title, the building, floor, serves, and schedule all sort of stay sticky to the top until I get below, which is a nice feature. The way Reflow graphics work, all of your points are available here on the right. If a user can interact with them, they'll get this little chevron arrow. Because all of my points are writable, you'll see that on all of my points. But know that if any of these were read-only, that arrow wouldn't be there. A user can click on a point. If the point has a history attached to it, we will notice that and automatically link to that history. So I can go to the history for this cooling valve command instantly. And I can just click AHU1 to get right back. If the user has permissions and they're able to run actions on points, those will appear here below history. And so if I want to do an override, I can do that. And notice that this one says custom emergency. That's because I've customized the name of my action. In Niagara, those pull in automatically. Now we see that we've overridden the point. The status shows in the familiar overridden status color, and I can set it back to auto if I need. What's really cool about this is it happens the same way on mobile. So if I switch to a mobile view, here's our large cards. User taps, makes a change, taps OK. Same interaction on desktop and mobile, and that's really important. With most graphics you're using with Niagara out of the box, you got to train users to right-click on desktop and tap and get potentially a pop-up that doesn't match the rest of your design system. So this is a really nice way to unify both experiences. My serves on the top, I mentioned that I added, when I added those VAVs, I said they were served by this air handler. If a user clicks on that, it brings them down to the devices served here. And of course, they can click to immediately get to one of those devices. And click served by air handler 1 to get back to that air handler. Differences in these cards. So if I go into the air handler and I go into the points, see, these cards are shown by group. These are what are known as large cards. These are what are known as small cards. And you can edit the group to determine whether they're large or small cards. So if I drop this down to small cards, now because there are no large cards, the equipment graphic takes up the full screen. Large cards, it'll be over here on the left. I can also choose to show group names. So if I edit each one of these, whoops. Add a display group name. Now I have headers for my points, and these headers are clickable so they can be contracted and expanded in the graphic. You can also set specific ones to be contracted or collapsed by default. The other thing I want to show you on these graphics is the different styles. So again, we still have the reflow display style active, but if we change it to the component's default Niagara view, the PX file gets embedded. And I can control the size of that as well. So I'll just make it a little larger. And so this is the way that you can pull in animated graphics, or if you've purchased additional 3D graphic assets, you can incorporate them right into Reflow. You can create a baseline graphic like you're used to in a PX file, pull that right into Reflow. We just urge you to try to keep it minimal. Let our point components work because they're going to work great on mobile and on desktop. Maybe you want to add some labels for things like sensors and things like that, but really try to stay minimal when you're building PX graphics that are going to be embedded in this way. The other option, so of course I could pick any view in Niagara by just clicking a custom ord. The other option though is the Niagara HX view, and in this case we're just going to pull that in full screen. We're not going to show any point cards from Reflow. This is just a full screen PX. This is great for retrofitting jobs. If you've got graphics already built and you want to add a nice UI on top of them with some cool dashboards and all the other features that Reflow provides, you can do that and just reuse those existing graphics this way. We'll still show things like served by cards and stuff like that. Okay, any questions on equipment graphics? Okay. We got about 15 or so minutes. I want to show you, particularly I'd like to show you the floor plans as well. There's some really cool features in here, so we'll dive into that next. I'll go into the student union building that we created. And remember when we started our session today, we went through the wizard and said that this building had 4 floors. When I click into a floor, we'll get to the floors option under the building. And what we recommend here, we're going to show each floor sort of as a card here. We recommend grabbing some interior shots, and these can be cell phone shots of the floors. They end up looking really nice in here. But real shots versus thumbnails of architectural drawings are usually preferred. And then when you're building the floor plan, again, you have your 2 options. We'll do Niagara first. Remember, I've got that PX file on this folder here. If I wanted to pull that in, I can embed a floor plan with a PX file right inside of Reflow. On the Reflow floor editor, users can jump between floors. They can use the arrows to navigate left and right to go up and down the floors. The other option is the Reflow floor plan editor. And when I open this, it's going to expand full screen, and it's going to give me similar to some of the functionality you'll find in a PX editor, but we've added a few things that we think is super helpful. So I'm going to grab this rendering here of this floor and use that as my background image. So you're still going to pull in images for floor plans. What you do sort of on top of them as far as the interactive elements are where Reflow adds some things to the equation. In the floor plan editor, you can zoom, you can pan, hold down the space and you can pan. We've got a couple presets in there and you can fit to screen. Next to the zoom bar is this toolbar that allows me to insert content into this view. We'll get started with our label component. I click on that and it appears here in the middle. I can click and drag it to move. I can resize it just like that. When I select an element in here, I'm going to be able to edit it here in these bindings, properties, and style tabs. Specifically for labels, we try to take advantage of some of the work that you've already done in Reflow. So the binding type here is set to Reflow device by default. You've already identified equipment, and you've also told us what the featured point should be. When you can only show 1 point for a device, this is what it should be. So all you need to do is go in here and pick the device that you added. In this case, we'll say VAV1. By picking that device, we set the point to be displayed for you. we hyperlink to the equipment graphic for you already, and we add in the name of the device for you. Now you can go into the Properties tab, set a proper title. So we'll call this one Conference Room. Maybe there's a room number that you want to add. And all of that will display really nicely on the label. Additionally, maybe we want to draw some zones. I can pull up this polygon tool and I can draw as many zones as I'd like. Just add one in here. Zones can have hyperlinks as well. They can also have dynamic colors. So I can pick any color, my primary, secondary, custom color, or I can choose dynamic. Dynamic gives me a new tab. I can pick any point in Niagara, and I'll just open up this picker here, grab my ramp. And because I picked a numeric, we're going to allow you to do a deviation. So when it's within the deviation, we'll color it green. When it's above, we'll color it red. When it's below, we'll leave it blue. And then we can set a target. The target can be a Niagara point or a static number. And the deviation tolerance can, again, this is plus or minus, can be a static number or a Niagara point. So this could be a set point. This could be different based on occupied or unoccupied for comfort level. And you can see that changing. Note that this point is not related to the point on the VAV. I'm just going to use our text element here, and I'll pull that numeric point next to this zone just so you have a reference. So I'll choose point, and again, I'll grab that numeric point. And so you can see our target's 72, and we've got a deviation of plus or minus 12. So 84 and above, this should be red. At 60 and below, this should be blue. And everywhere in between, it'll be green. And you'll see this as this ramp moves up and down, you'll see this change. We have arrows and images that are supported as well, fully customizable. Won't go into those just yet, but something that you can check out and play with. What I do want to show you, though, is how things work in mobile. So when we look at this from an end user perspective, and I click into the first floor, here's how my floor plan works in desktop. And users have the same functionality as you do in the editor. They can zoom in and out. They can pan around with their mouse. When I click on a label, it's going to take me right to the graphic. The breadcrumb changes. It knows that I came from a floor plan, so it's going to allow me to get back there really easily. Zoom state remembers. It remembers that I was zoomed into this exact position when I left. I'll fit to screen here. The problem is on a mobile phone, these things get really small. Maps get hard to read. Text is almost unreadable. Users have to pinch and zoom. They have to get out bifocals as they're walking through a hallway trying to pull up an important piece of data on their phone. So we handle mobile differently. If I go into mobile, we just show the important stuff, which in this case is a label. And we make that available to the user. The important data rises and bubbles up to the top. What's really cool, though, is this is portrait mode. If the user rotates their device over to landscape mode, they get access to that full map. They can pinch and zoom, and we take up as much space as possible on the phone. So the two different mobile views. You can control what labels are visible on this list, as well as make zones and text visible on the list in the floor plan editor. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if I click on this label, you can see checked, visible on the mobile list. I can do the same thing for this zone, and we'll call it conference room zone. And conference text. So now by checking that, when we go into the mobile view, that'll be visible. One other thing on labels, and this is really awesome and should save you a ton of time. I showed you that you can just pick the device from the list here and add each label individually. But we can do better than that because you've already identified all of the labels that should be on this floor because you've identified every piece of equipment on this floor. So let me delete this label here. And if you go over here to actions, insert labels for all equipment, We know which labels belong on this floor because you've told us. All you have to do is hit run. We pull in every label for you automatically, hyperlink it to the proper graphic, pull in the featured point, put my air handlers out here to the side, and you're good to go. All you need to do now is really hide the actions pane, go to properties, set friendly names for the rooms, you're good to go. So hopefully this saves you a lot of time compared to doing PX graphics. And then if I look into the floor plan now, and we take a look at the mobile view, there's all my labels, there's my zone, there's my text. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Any questions on floor plans and how that system works? Okay, real quick, we got about 5 or 10 minutes here. I want to make sure there's time for overall questions. I've been in this buildings page a lot. I think the important thing to point out here, buildings have their own sub-navigation, and you can assign, they mirror this global navigation, which of course you can customize. When I'm assigning things to buildings, I assign my equipment by assigning it to a floor on a building. But if I want to assign alarms to a building, by default, it's going to show all my alarms. As soon as I check an alarms class, it's going to filter that building by those alarms. Same thing with schedules. We're going to show all schedules unless you filtered it, and now we're just going to show the ones that you filtered. Histories, if you're using history groups, I'm not, so this option is disabled. You can pick history groups that are associated with the building, or you can actually pick specific histories. And again, if you haven't picked anything, we're just going to default to showing them all. So that's how you can quickly assign things to buildings, and that's how the content for these items under the building works. You can also fully customize the sub-navigation for each building, or you can turn it off. And again, those items work exactly like the main navigation items work. Also, when we're in mobile and we're looking at sub-navigation, it appears above with the building name, and then the main navigation below. So there's lots more to discover in Reflow. There's quite a few more features that we won't have time to get to in the 2 hours that we had together. I would encourage you to explore the product. All of you should have a demo license available to you so you can run without trial mode pop-ups and any restrictions on the number of devices and buildings that you can add as you're building customer demos. I would definitely recommend that you take a look and play around with it. So I see some questions in the chat. Feel free to keep them coming. First one, is there a way to show the room temp history on the VAV graphic rather than having to go to the history? So not currently. That is a feature that, as you can imagine, is been requested quite a bit. Right now, the only way, and so I don't have, let me edit this graphic. I don't have any histories attached to my fake VAVs. Let me switch this graphic over to Reflow. I do have that history on the cooling valve command. So that's really the way to show it here, is under the point. We do have some features planned to allow you to add similar cards to what we have on history cards and dashboards. So similar to this, you'll be able to add those to equipment graphics. And that will be in a future release. Again, we release every 30 to 45 days, typically once a month. That's a feature that will be here likely by the end of the summer, early fall. Feel free to ask follow-up questions on that too, David. Next question, can data from multiple historical point values be exported to CSV files from the web browser and mobile? In this version of Reflow, it cannot. So in this version of Reflow, while we will allow you to view a tabular data with multiple values, you aren't able to export from CSV yet. We will be in 1.5, which was due out at the end of July. That feature will be there. You will be able to export this data, multiple values as a CSV. Currently, if you try to do that, CSV won't be an option. But we're going to take the same philosophy where the time needs to be listed twice to make that work. And the rub there is that these times don't necessarily, from numeric random isn't tracking data at the same time as sine wave. So there's a couple things you can do. Niagara will sort of take the data and interpolate it a little bit and sort of try to say, well, probably at this time it was around this based on the values, before and after it. We don't have that. That's another feature that we'll be building in at some point, sampling. But what we will be doing for our first CSV export will be exactly this: exact time, exact value, and you'll have multiple time columns for one for each value. So look for that here at the end of July. Likewise, can the room label show both the set point and the ZNT on the same label? So right now our labels only support a single point being linked on a floor plan. Lots of people have requested additional options. We rolled out the first one of those options. Whoops, I'm in equipment here. I want to be in floor plans. We rolled out the first one of those options in our 1.3 or 1.4 release, I think. And that was people wanted smaller labels to take up less space so they could show multiple points. I'll show you what that looks like real quick. So in this conference room, I can go to style, I can choose size mode, and I can do compact. And that's going to just show like this. So you could stack these up on top of each other. If I just duplicate this one, you can sort of see how that would work. So you can stack them up this way. And of course, if you didn't want that, to show, you could just delete conference room out of that one. You're able to stack those up. The other option here, and I'll do it to this air handler, is compact vertical. Instead of laying out across, they'll lay out sort of top to bottom, sort of same option. Now you have more, you're more compact width-wise instead of height-wise. So those are two options for now. We've got a full set of additional elements that'll be added along with different label styles and future updates of Reflow. This tool is only going to sort of grow and grow, and options are going to get better and better for what you can add here. I can tell you that in 1.5 we'll be doing a large pass of the floor plan system, and a few of those things will be added, as well as some quality of life features like making some of these tabs easier to navigate, allowing you to make them larger, and things like that. Okay, well, I hope, feel free to fire out some more questions. I know we're coming right up on time here. I hope you found this session useful. I want to let you know, as you are working with your demo and trying Reflow out, if you run into any problems at all, and I'm going to try to pull up it looks like our website's running for me here in Chrome. If you run into any problems at all, I'm right down here in this live chat on our website. You can see this is automated. Our typical reply time is under 5 minutes. Get a hold of us. Just click the send a message button and we'll respond. We're typically really quick, and we promise to get back within 24 hours if you catch us during a training session or off hours. So utilize that resource. We're happy to help you. We're happy to help you come up with, along with Building Controls Group, help you to come up with demos to sell to your clients, selling materials and things like that. Anything we can do to help you get Reflow in your customers' hands, we're happy to do it. So thanks for the time today. Again, any follow-up questions, I'll hang around for 5 or 10 minutes after, but if that's all you needed, feel free to jump out. And thanks again.